Back in the early 2000s, somebody on 4chan wanted to write a story about skinwalkers, but didn't really want to fit the skinwalker lore, so they came up with the worst possible combination of words, which was Fleshgait. I'm Aiden Mattis, and welcome to the Flesh Lodge. So we've talked about the Wendigo, we've talked about the Skinwalker, we've talked about, well, we haven't talked about the Rake, we should probably do that.
Yeah.
I've talked about them on TikTok, but point is, these are Native American folk monsters who have inspired a collective fiction realm that has created monsters such as the Rake, the white person version of the Wendigo, which has the antlers on it, and the Fleshgait, which is my personal favorite of all of these. Now, if you're thinking, Skinwalker, Fleshgait, these sound like kind of similar things, they are. And that's probably where the term came from, because of course flesh and skin are the same, and the way that you walk is called your gait. So, probably where that came from. Now, the actual origin of the Fleshgait story, it's anonymous, because it was on 4chan, it was on /X. We actually don't know who wrote it or who came up with it. And if you believe in something like tulpas, then there would be the possibility, of course, that our collective acknowledgement of the Fleshgait has created it in the real world, which is an utterly terrifying concept, so please don't think about the Fleshgait, unless you want to. I mean, I'm not in charge of you. But at this point in the video, you may be wondering, Aiden, why are you rambling on about this? Although also, if you're at this point in the video, you've probably been keeping up with our videos in general, so you probably know this is kind of how this goes. It's like we were sitting at a bar, I'm 3 drinks in, and you just asked me to explain something. That's how we do the show. Except I don't drink beforehand, because that would be utter chaos. Maybe I should start trying that. Anyway, so what makes the Fleshgait different from the Wendigo and the Skinwalker, which of course are their own things all on their own, but it has a lot in common with them. The ability to mimic voices, the fact that they hide out in the woods and attack unsuspecting campers and hikers who go off the trail. Now, part of what makes the Fleshgait in its own mythology so specifically terrifying is its ability to corrupt memories. And in just about every retelling of this legend, every account or sighting, even though most of these are just fiction, the Fleshgait itself is someone who inserts itself into the group at some point, generally. And nobody in the group will be able to remember who's the odd man out. Something will feel wrong, but it has the ability to implant memories so you feel like you've known it the whole time. But once you catch on, you start to notice. So an experienced one will be able to keep up the ruse for a very long time. The Fleshgait will often appear in human form, and that's how it sneaks up on you and tricks you. But where does it get that human form? Well, that's where things get even worse, because the Fleshgait can only take the form of people it has killed. So, that new friend in your group, who you kind of recognize but you're confused where he came from, that was some real person that the Fleshgait killed and took on their form. Isn't that wonderful? On top of the issue of being able to implant memories, there is also the mimicry aspect. So one way that Fleshgaits will lure people off into the woods in some of the stories when they're not inserting themselves into a group, say a less experienced or a younger Fleshgait will simply stay off the beaten path and wait for somebody in your group to separate and then call out to you in their voice in the wrong direction so that somebody from the group goes off to look for it, at which point it will kill them and take their skin. This is very similar to a lot of the Wendigo and Skinwalker mythology. Wendigos will, of course, mimic the voices of loved ones. So will Skinwalkers. This is one thing that they have in common, and it's part of the reason that I believe that all of these legends come from a origin, so a single common denominator that got diffused throughout, different geographical regions. One thing that's often not addressed in the stories about Fleshgaits is exactly how they victimize people. It seems that they don't use weapons. They just are maybe super strong or super fast. Maybe they pick up a stick and whack you over the head with it. But given the fact that in almost all of the stories, they prefer to use deception and trickery to catch their prey, it's likely that they don't have the same sort of natural weapons that a Skinwalker or a Wendigo would have, nor do they seem to carry weapons. Also, one thing that is common with them is that when they do speak, when they do mimic people, they can only mimic words they've already heard. So in a conversation, you might catch on, because everything that the Fleshgait is saying is going to be something that it's already heard. Now, if this is a younger one, it'll be much easier to catch on because it's going to be saying things that it just heard from your group. If it's an older, more experienced one, it's going to have a larger vocabulary. It's going to have more memories and more words that it can weave together to the point where it almost sounds exactly like a human. And if Fleshgates were to be real, that would explain why the only encounters that people survive to write down are the ones where they've encountered young ones. Also, I should point out that Fleshgates are probably the reason for so much confusion between Wendigo and Skinwalker and the Rake and all of these different offshoots. The Fleshgate takes just enough from each piece and is, since it doesn't have a multi-century long tradition behind it, it can be applied in any way you want it to. It's beginning to have its own canon on the internet, but it can really fit into any story, and you can edit the Fleshgate in a way that people, when they read your story, aren't going to know that you've, smudged some details here and there. Whereas with the Skinwalker and the Wendigo, you kind of have to go with an established canon of lore. One thing that is common in the stories about Fleshgates, written presumptively by survivors of these encounters, is that they don't kill them usually. It seems that what generally happens is if the Fleshgate realizes that you've caught on to it, it will either try and get each member of the party alone and then take care of them, or it'll just back off. Which is why I said that they don't seem to be apex predators naturally. They're like us. They hunt using cleverness. They use their brains rather than their brawn. So, to wrap things up, should you encounter a Fleshgate, the best way to handle it is going to be to make everybody else in the party aware of it, and then agree to, without making a scene, head back to the car, leave the woods, and never go back. Because Fleshgates seem to be territorial. They won't even follow you across a road in most of these stories. So if you leave the woods, you're going to be fine. It's not the kind of thing where it's going to hunt you down, trace you back home. It's not going to come after you if you summon it. It's not going to be something like that. We're talking about, it's a shapeshifter, but it's not, the super intense, really scary kind. It's the kind that more just gets under your skin and makes you feel something wrong. This is something that's going to trigger your uncanny valley effect and your fight or flight response without you really understanding why. You're going to have a creeping, gnawing feeling of anxiety every time you see it. And eventually, if you stay out with it long enough and you don't catch on, it will probably drive you insane, at which point maybe you'll just kill all your friends, and then by the time you get back to the sheriff's department, they don't believe you that there was a Fleshgate off in the woods, because that's a crazy thing to tell them. But should you find yourself in a situation where you encounter this likely entirely fictional creature, my recommendation would be fire. Fire is always a good option. If there's something you don't like, fire. Tax documents you don't like, fire. Neighbor's car makes a really annoying sound, fire. Child predator moved into the neighborhood. For legal reasons, I'm not going to say fire. And if you want to keep the fleshy boys away, the best way to do that is to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and follow us on Patreon. We have tiers from $1 to $100. We love all of you equally, except for the fact that we like the people who do the $100 tier more. I'm Aiden Mattis, and thanks for stopping by the Lore Lodge.